Hundreds of thousands of researchers around the world are working to improve life and address imminent threats to humanity. Often their research ends up in the scientific valley of death in the form of publications and patents that never see the light of day. That is about to change. Welcome to the Lab to Startup podcast, hosted by Naresh Sunkara, founder and executive director of the Berkeley Postdoc Entrepreneurship Program at the University of California, Berkeley. This show has two main goals: share the stories of those who have successfully founded startups based on their own research, and highlight resources needed to help those aspiring to launch startups in the deep tech space. Whether it's electric cars, vaccines, addressing climate change concerns, or possibly establishing life on other planets, Naresh and his esteemed guests want to help scientists, engineers, faculty, and researchers bring their innovations to market. Learn more and subscribe today at labtostartup.com. And now, here's Naresh.
My guest today is Stephanie Janciński, Director of Entrepreneurship of the Resnick Sustainability Institute at the California Institute of Technology. She drives the strategic planning and implementation of new entrepreneurial initiatives in cleantech and sustainability. This is part of the new mandate of the Institute, funded by a $750 million gift made by Stuart and Linda Resnick in 2019. The program offers education and training to launch new ventures in an innovative concierge approach to entrepreneurship, adapted to scientific and engineering institutes such as Caltech. Steph is very committed to the concierge part of the program, where she and a team of advisors offer a helping hand to startups from the application stage through the life of a startup as needed. In this episode of Lab to Startup, we will talk about the Rocket Fund, the application process, funding criteria, granting mechanism, partners that add value to the program, and the general funding landscape for climate tech. There is a lot to learn about how the fund operates, and I hope you enjoy this informative conversation with Stephanie. Welcome to the show, Stephanie. I've been wanting to bring you on as a podcast guest since the first time we chatted about the Rocket Fund at Caltech, and I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Actually, very pleased that you've invited me. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's get this started. So let's start with the basics. What is Rocket Fund all about?
The Rocket Fund is a granting pool of funding that provides small but smart grants for prototyping. That's it in a nutshell. So we know from long experience that when young companies leave the lab or the garage, actually, the first thing that they begin to do is reaching out to customers. That's what they learn to do very early on. And I've worked with hundreds of companies, and we know that customers often say, you know what, I love your technology, looks interesting, maybe it's something that we might want to test and buy, but come back in 2 years when your technology is closer to product and we can actually begin to work with it. And I have to say, Naresh, that even now there's precious little money for filling that so-called valley of death. It's been around a long time. People know about it. That's where companies often die. So we set up the Rocket Fund to support young companies through that valley of death. And what we do is we help them build initial prototypes, that very first prototype where they can begin testing their technology in the real world. And with that, they start de-risking the technology and they start demonstrating with customers. So we know that once these entrepreneurs prove that their technology works as claimed in the real world, then the customers will actually start lining up. And then when the customers line up, so will investors. So one of the questions is, what do we look for in the Rocket Fund? So generally, we fund companies that have a strong technology base. And that might be a couple of years out from the academic laboratory or the garage. That's really the foundation of the Rocket Fund, is looking at the strong technology. But we know that they're still developing and testing their technologies. We do, by the way, fund software ventures, but we look for a truly novel platform or a truly innovative way to apply the software. And I have to say that in general, we definitely fund fewer software than we do hardware companies. Now, we expect the hard tech companies to have done enough customer discovery to have a good idea of what their initial beachhead market is going to be and a realistic business model about how to reach it. And that is where the Rocket Fund really over the years has played a key role, because we can help you connect to your market and hopefully convince potential customers or partners to take a serious look. By the way, the team doesn't have to be large. I know that for investors, the team makeup is really, really important. It's certainly important enough that we need to see a strong, well-integrated group of people who are committed to the project and able to execute on the Rocket Fund Award. But we know that the teams are still in formation, that often they'll consist of maybe 2 to 3 people who are still developing the technology. That's not a problem for us.
You touched upon so many things here, like the value of death, the teams, the seed funding, all important topics to our audience. But before we dive deep into these topics, can you give some context about how the fund was established and the problems you wanted to solve through this fund?
It grew out of a previous program that I ran for 8 years called FLOW, First Look West. This was a business plan competition that was funded by the Department of Energy specifically to support university students starting cleantech companies. So during the 8 years, I probably saw over 300 companies or prospective companies. And as part of the program, we would organize meetups with our 6 major California utilities. And the idea was that they would sit down one-on-one and begin to share ideas about how their technology could be deployed eventually on the grid. And from that, we saw pretty much immediately that what was missing for these companies was the funding that they needed to actually build a prototype that could be tested by the utilities. They were just a bit too early. So it actually happened over a breakfast. We had a usual breakfast meeting that you have at a conference. And I want to name names here: Edwin Hornquist and Kate Zhang. Edwin works as the Emerging Technologies Director at SCE, and Kate has a similar role at San Diego Gas and Electric. And at that meeting, we cooked up really the model for the Rocket Fund. We knew how much we wanted to give the companies. We knew that we were targeting this early stage prototyping specifically to be able to get them more ready for the utilities to be able to partner with.
That's fascinating. We never hear too much about how they're adopting new technologies. If you can shed some light on that from your experiences, that'll be great.
When we started in 2015, I can tell you that the utilities were not really geared to working with earlier stage companies. Their model was to work with companies that already had a product. They might have had a small market share, so they could actually work with that through their incentive schemes. Since then, what's happened is that they have got very serious about supporting emerging technologies, those that don't have a product yet, that are still figuring out how their technology can be adapted to the needs of the grid. So working with the Emerging Technologies Coordinating Council, which is this group of experts or technology people who also know what works on the grid, we've been able to come up with various vehicles, including the Rocket Fund, to be able to introduce early stage companies to the right people within the utilities. So this is typically the program managers that you don't get to meet very often, who don't kind of emerge from behind the firewall very often. So we have a way of introducing our companies and presenting them in a way that shows the value that the technologies could have if they begin working with utilities. So that's all grown up over the 6 years that we've been running the Rocket Fund. I do want to point out, by the way, some factoids about how successful we've been, because honestly, when we started, given the size of the grants that we offer, they range from $25,000 to $75,000. That's a spit in the wind, quite frankly, for hard tech, clean tech companies. I talked to one the other day that said they needed 100 million actually to scale up. But it turns out that the money is actually really useful. I'll explain why in a moment. But I will say that giving that size of grants, we've given a bit over $1 million to 37 companies. 35 of them are still in business. And not only that, they have raised well over now $100 million in follow-on either grants, sales and services, or investment. So the leverage of our relatively small Rocket Fund grants is really important. It happens because of what we fund. First of all, equipment purchases. Believe it or not, a lot of grants, major federal grants, won't pay for that. They won't cover it. It's extremely frustrating for an early stage startup. We fund certification, another thing that investors certainly won't pay for, grants won't cover. Customers expect you to have some certification in place before they'll even look at you. We fund the design of prototypes. So if you understand that we are funding TRL 5 to 7, I don't know what people's understanding of that is, but basically it's the next stage out of the lab prototype up to, I would say, pre-product. The important thing is that we fund you designing the prototype, iterating it, and installing it. We also pay for consulting services to help you understand the scaling up and manufacture of the technology, the development of it from being a nice technology innovation into a product. So that's one reason that we've been successful. The other is because when we come in, If I've talked to our awardees and gone back and surveyed them about why they like the Rocket Fund, well, it's free money for a start. Everybody likes free money. There's no equity involved at all. But the other thing is when we fund them, they say, Steph, you come in at a time when nobody would touch us. So we've often saved the companies from going under by giving them, let's say, that strategic piece of money they needed to get UL certification. I have that on record as saving a company that went on and has now got a customer base and is bringing in revenue.
What I'm loving about this check that you write is it can fund equipment and certification, things that other grants like SBI would not actually fund. So important, and people don't get it, I guess, but I'm loving whatever you're saying here. You mentioned the concierge approach to supporting startups. What kind of support do you offer to these startups from the application process through the life of a startup? If you have some examples, that'd be great.
We actually are very proud of the concierge approach that we take to working with our companies. So, for instance, unlike other programs, we deliberately keep the window for applications open for over 3 months. We know that we'll be attracting startups unfamiliar with our specific value proposition and often unsure how to present their story. So I always suggest that prospective candidates start an application and then come to me over those weeks with questions about how to fill it out. We're happy to answer those questions. We want you to have the greatest chance of success. And also, we want you to present yourselves in the best way possible. It is to your advantage to take the extra effort, as you'll be reviewed by a powerful group of influencers on the Technology Advisory Committee. Now, this approach is particularly important with spinouts that are new to the Rocket Fund. So, for instance, last year we reached out to Carnegie Mellon University and to the incubator at the University of Texas, Austin. Now, their companies were well versed in commercial language and how to present themselves, but we worked closely with all of their candidates to prepare answers to some of the trickier questions in the application process for a Rocket Fund. For instance, we like to see their view, and we have a view of a realistic market projection, because we are going to be addressing that with the Rocket Fund. That's going to be the beachhead market that we focus on supporting. And also how the companies are going to use our Rocket Fund money. We ask for stage use, 25,000, 50, and 75,000, and not all companies really understand how each level can be catalytic. After applications close, we offer the same support throughout the semifinal process where the companies need to prepare a more detailed due diligence report. But I have to say that really we provide the most assistance to finalists who will be now preparing a presentation for the finals. We know that we can only give them maybe about 8 minutes or so for that final presentation in front of a very powerful review panel. So I get a lot of questions on what to keep in the main presentation, what to include in the appendices, what to emphasize in those 8 minutes. What the team, for instance, should that be emphasized? Or the potential market? How to deal with the competitive landscape in such a short space of time? And as always, how to really do the ask, how to really phrase the use of rocket funds that will really impress that panel. So last year, our winners, for instance, included companies from Massachusetts. Aeroshield Materials was one, and Texas, Induction Food Systems. They were motivated enough and used the service that we provide to add to their already seasoned experience in putting together presentations, to put together a fine presentation that won them an award on the day at the Rocket Fund.
Are there stories of hand-holding that you had to do and help a startup that really benefited from your mentorship?
In answering this question, I'd like to say that really the importance is connections, okay, for companies that are at this early stage and are still building their connections to either prospective customers or to prospective partners. So the one thing I will say about the Rocket Fund and how it functions is that we provide a boost of funding at just the right time, and for items other sources of funding won't cover. So if we look at what happened to our awardees, we can see that our money, together with other sources of support, helped propel them forward towards independence within a few years. But in addition to that, what is important is that we connect them to other sources of funding as well. We know that our grants are relatively small. They're smart, but they're small grants. So it's our job really to now connect them with our extensive network of other agencies and other companies and other channel partners that could provide some additional support for what we started. So, for instance, Antora Energy, a Stanford spin-out developing long-term storage, received a Rocket Fund grant in 2019 to literally buy a piece of equipment to produce materials for customer testing. Then, with that in hand, they were able to secure an ARPA-E award of $3 million that following September. They then went on to pull in a California Energy Commission grant of $2 million in 2020. And as I say, the rest is history. Along the way, though, I was able to refer them to the Shell Game Changer program, which then won them a voucher to continue technology development within the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. You know, that kind of connection not only brings the technical resources and the technical expertise of NREL to bear on their technology, but also it is a wonderful gold stamping of the company as being real, and their technology receiving the kind of validation that an NREL can give. So I was very pleased to be able to do that.
That is a very fascinating story that the Rocket Fund was able to help them buy a piece of equipment, get some data, and then that led to ARPA-E money and then Shell Game Changer. These are the kind of stories that people need to hear and seek funding from you. Thank you for sharing those stories.
Can I mention one more, actually,
Yes,
Naresh?
yes.
Okay. And it's important, and I'll tell you why after I finish. A different path was followed by Yota Solar. This is a Texas company with an energy storage device which can be attached to solar panels for use in commercial settings. So Yota worked with us closely during the application process. Again, they were a Texas company that wasn't really familiar with the Rocket Fund. And during that, we got to know their needs for finding scale-up money very well. So this year, it's now 2 years on, we helped facilitate meetings with our partner at the Electric Power Research Institute, and together they applied and they won a major California Energy Commission bridge grant of $1.229 million. This is, by the way, just being announced. Now, this is going to help them build a demonstration facility in California, which will form the basis of their business here. And that's, again, another role that the Rocket Fund can play with our partners, not just the Electric Power Research Institute, but also Shell Game Changer and the IM2 Wells Fargo program.
Those are some great examples. On a related note, did the needs of these startups change over the past few years? And if so, how did the funding criteria evolve?
One thing that I had mentioned to you is that we are changing our framework for the call this year. So I want to go through that a little bit. Previously, we had a very broad funnel of technologies that we looked at. They fell into two categories, roughly. One was the one that benefited the utilities, so that was energy efficiency, demand response, storage, grid management. And then sustainability was the other bucket that was very big. So that included everything else from renewables to CO2 sequestration to water management. We decided actually last year, given the urgency of what we're seeing in climate change, the need for technologies to really get through the hurdles that we're facing sustainability to be deployed faster, we had to respond to that. And what we've done is we've organized the framework for the Rocket Fund into 5 tracks. And those tracks are to really address the white spaces that we're seeing where we feel that we can have an impact. So those tracks include integrated grid and decarbonized energy systems, green buildings and new materials, what we're calling the hard to decarbonize. That includes obviously industries such as cement and steel. It also includes, by the way, agriculture, aspects to agriculture that are really hard to decarbonize. A general category for environment, and also what we're calling moonshot. We've been very lucky over the years that we've been able to be a little bit ahead of trends. For instance, we funded Opus 12 when it was still Opus 12. It's now called 12. We gave them an award. We actually funded them through Flow, by the way, even before that. So we were on to dioxide sequestration long before people began to take a very serious interest into it. We want to keep that leading edge sight, if you like, in what we do. So we have a track called Moonshot, and that's for all of those that are not quite sure where they fit. We're prepared to take a look at you. So the program is going to launch by mid-November. we are going to close applications on the 4th of March next year. So a long application period. One reason that we do that is because we like to be very hands-on with applicants. And this is where we're a little bit different. I invite applicants to contact me and I'll tell them what we want. I'll help them shape their application. And the reason we do that is because we want them all to present their best foot forward in the application, because we have a very strong technology advisory committee, very well connected, very smart people. And I want them to see the very best that we have. So we have a longer application period than most, specifically for that reason. Once you submit your application, it's all done online, by the way. And if anybody is interested, just go to the Rocket Fund website at Caltech. All you do is Google Rocket Fund, and all the information will be there. The application to the portal will be there. And as I say, we'll be up and running in a couple of weeks. So once your application is submitted, it goes through a screening process. And then you will be asked, if you're selected, to fill in a more detailed due diligence report that goes into the areas that we asked for on the application form in more detail. That will then be, in this case, this year, it'll be distributed to the tracks that you have selected to participate in. You'll be reviewed by a select group of experts who really have knowledge in the sector, both technical and business. Once those due diligence reports are reviewed and scored, we then gather the Technology Advisory Committee together to go over the scores and discuss which companies should be selected to go through to the finals. Now, the finals will happen this year at the beginning of June. Companies will be asked to present in person. When I say in person, I think it'll still be in quotes. In other words, it's going to be virtual, to the full Technology Advisory Committee. And honestly, we make our decisions on the second day. It's very fast. And once that happens, then the company will be contacted. We'll go through a discussion, create a memorandum of understanding, do some paperwork, and start the payment process. Typically, from submitting an application to getting the money in your bank account, it takes about 5 months. So it's pretty fast. And that's important for fast growth companies. They don't have time to waste at this stage.
So you give the checks out in around June of next year.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not a rolling closing.
No, not at all.
I'm liking a lot of things that you said. You're looking at the white spaces that are not being touched, and you're evolving based on the needs of the entrepreneurs. I think that is admirable. I'm sure entrepreneurs are going to like this. Talk us about the check sizes and how you make those decisions.
So this year, again, because we've established these 5 tracks, there's going to be an award assigned to each. The size of the award, whether it's a $25,000, $50,000, or $75,000, depends very much on your use of funds, what you propose. So for instance, I ask companies to always give me a staged ask. I know that you will probably think that you want the most money, but it's really interesting. If you begin to look at what we fund and you stage your ask at $25,000, $50,000, and $75,000, it's amazing what smart use you can make of even $50,000. And we know we can't fund all our companies. We typically give out maybe 5 to 7 awards out of something like 20 to 22 finalists. So we know we can't fund everybody to the full extent. We'd rather you got something than nothing. And if you take a quick look and see where you can apply either even $25,000, that means that you get a useful sum of money at a time that you need it.
Stephanie, give us a sense of the stages of startups that you fund.
Suresh, the age of the company is less important than the funding basis and the innovativeness and strength of the underlying technology. So we funded companies that were unincorporated, actually, when they applied, right up to those who've been in business 5 years or more and have received significant investment. However, I'd like to be clear that candidates must be incorporated to receive an award. For example, Brimstone Energy, Caltech spin-out actually, that is developing green cement, recently received a major seed investment, was unincorporated actually when they received an award in 2018. We were actually able to hold on to the award for 12 months until they completed that process. More recently, from last year, we funded Stow Energy, a company developing innovative thermal storage technology for the home. They literally just finished spinning themselves out from their parent organization, Other Lab. All the later stage companies, we funded eZinc. This is a Canadian company developing cost-efficient grid-scale storage based on the common metal, actually, zinc. after they'd received a $3 million investment from Energy Foundry. This is an investment firm based in Chicago. In that case, they carved out a catalytic role for the Rocket Fund to play in a subsequent grant that they had just won from the California Energy Commission. And that award was to build a demonstration plant in California. So what do we look for? Typically, our sweet spot is a company that is 2 to 5 years old with technology that's developed up to TRL4, and also a company with solid technology leadership. Now, with deep tech, we look for serious grant support from government funding agencies that completed the basic technology development. We don't fund applied R&D. I have to make that very clear. An example of how strong government funding provides a good foundation for a Rocket Fund award is Cypress Materials. Their initial work on developing novel reflective coatings was funded actually by ARPA-E. After incorporation and moving into their own labs, they applied for a number of sources of additional funding, including ours. The Rocket Fund award that they received paid for scaling up their process enough to make a product that prospective customers could then test for quality. Now, in addition to the founders, we value a company that has built a strong advisory board with savvy business representation from either the customer stakeholders or from prospective partners. With advisors who have taken technology through the various scale-up stages to market, we know that our money is going to be well spent under their guidance. So let me give you a good example of this type of candidate. SkyCool Systems is a Stanford spin-out with innovative rooftop cooling technology based on radiative sky cooling. They have a patented multi-layer optical coating that they've developed. Now, at the time of their application, they had an advisor on their board who had previously worked at Walmart developing their commercial supply chain. So they helped SkyCool develop and optimize their own supply chain. And that's a pretty good example of the kind of advisory support that we look for. Now, software companies have a different trajectory, of course, in business development. They are tackling established markets, often with lots of competition. They have a faster development time. And there we look for an innovative platform that will raise the company above the noise of competing products. So both WeaveGrid and PowerFlex that were awardees have innovative but different ways of approaching managing the interaction between the grid and the growing demand of electrical vehicles needing charging, often at the same time. So WeaveGrid has gone on to raise serious investment, while PowerFlex was acquired by EDF Renewables North America in 2019. And PowerFlex has grown to almost being a standalone company within EDF by absorbing other units within that French conglomerate. So in that case, our money again was the catalytic force, if you like, that allowed them to demonstrate to, in both cases actually, to prospective customers, that they had a technology that would be able to rise above the competition in being able to organize and manage the grid power flow.
That is a wide range of startups you have. And I think what you mentioned was the catalytic role the money plays at different stages of startups. And I think the values of the partnership that you bring enhances that money.
Yes, we're very proud of the partnerships that we've been able to form over the 6 years that we've been running, right across the country and with many stakeholders.
I saw on your website that you work with partners like Wells Fargo, Shell, and others. What role do they play, and how are they leveraging their relations to help startups?
One of the points that you raised was, how do we provide follow-on support for our companies? And of course, we want to support our awardees, but our world extends to the semifinalists and the finalists who didn't get an award as well. So the way that we extend our support is forming channel relationships with other agencies that can provide some additional support. So two of them are the IN2 Wells Fargo program and the Shell Game Changer program. And the way that they work is by referrals. We're a channel partner, and what they do is once a year they do a call out. In each year it's in a different technology area to the channel partnerships that they have. We're one of them. I take a look at not just the awardees, not just the finalists, but our whole community of Rocket Fund companies and see where there's a good match with the call out that they have this year. I then refer the company to them IN2 and Shell Game Changer work the same way. They follow up with the named companies, ask them to fill out a form with more information. They will then go through a select process to see which they want to follow up with further. And then if you're selected, then you have to go into their due diligence process. Now, what you get from these two programs is the equivalent of $250,000. It depends each year, but it's been around $250,000 of in-kind support. It's called voucher support that buys you technology advice from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory experts, as well as access to their facilities. And that's huge. If you work with Enroll in one of these programs and get their gold stamp, this is technology is real. They can provide all sorts of technical advice and guidance to develop it further. Honestly, that's huge when it comes to talking to investors or talking to customers. So we're very pleased to be part of that program. And we've had at least 3 companies that have been accepted into the IN2 Wells Fargo program. And they vary, by the way, from software companies to hard tech companies as well. The other partnership that we have is with the Electric Power Research Institute. And I'm not sure if people who are listening to this blog are completely familiar with EPRI, but they are the preeminent research association that serves the utility industry. Their name gives it away. It's electric power industry, so the electric power utilities. The way that we work with them is twofold. We have a new program called the Technology Early Deployment Program, TED, that is set up specifically with Southern California Edison, that is the vehicle for bringing our Rocket Fund companies into close contact with the program managers within SCE. So you go through a process with EPRI where they prepare wonderful materials, I've seen them, that includes understanding of what the utilities are looking for. These they submit through the SCE process, and if you're selected to go further, then you'll sit down with these program managers and begin to craft ways of working together. And that can include technology advice again, it can include access to testing facilities. All of that might lead to the magical gold at the end of the rainbow, which is an incentive program that you could be included, which will get your product off the ground. So that's one way of working with EPRI. The other is that they are wonderful partners to include for big grant applications, let's say to the California Energy Commission. As probably the people who tune in know, CEC has a program called EPIC. They fund a whole range of technical support for early stage companies that range from CalSeed, which supports applied R&D, right through to the RAMP program, which provides money basically for scaling up your manufacturing. And along the way, there's at least 2 other programs, CalTestBed and the Bridge program. So applying for these used to be very difficult and challenging for small companies. Quite frankly, these government agencies, and after all, they are responsible to ratepayers like myself, didn't want to support early stage companies, but they've changed. So I can say that one of our Rocket Fund awardees, SkyCool Systems, possibly was part of that change because they won a major California Energy Commission grant of close to $2 million as the lead. In that case, it helped a lot that EPRI was the subcontracting partner. EPRI knows their way around these applications. They know how to set up the budgeting. They can bring their technical expertise to bear on them. And that model, in fact, was repeated this summer when another one of our Rocket Fund companies, Iota Solar, or Iota Energy as they're now called, won a $1.229 million CEC award, again with EPRI as the subcontracting partner. So it seems to work. And the role that Rocket Fund plays is not only in bringing these companies to EPRI's attention through the Rocket Fund process and supporting these companies, making them a little bit less risky, if you like, with a Rocket Fund award, but also we facilitate a lot of these meetings as well. And we play a key role in making sure that everybody stays on the same page and is moving forward.
Stephanie, what I'm hearing from the beginning is that you have identified unique areas. Most entrepreneurs struggle to get those partners. Usually they're hard to reach, and you've systematically, strategically brought them to the table from the beginning. They're providing input in terms of their needs, and then you are creating that value chain to those big utility companies and a pipeline for the startups to reach them. This is absolutely important. I commend everything you're doing in this. Staying on that subject, right? What have you seen that these entrepreneurs or clients most need from you? What repeats itself? And what is common in the ways you help them?
We touched on some, certainly connections to either viable partners that they can't normally reach, like the utilities, or to other funding sources. That's key. They need funding. They need also connection to people who can guide their technology development. So I've already alluded to the fact that Enroll is one of those that can help guide their technology development. We do personal introductions to people that we have connections to within the utilities that can help guide the technology development as well. We try to keep track of the funding sources that are coming through, let's say, the Department of Energy. I'm always surprised that busy entrepreneurs struggle with trying to keep track of all of this, so that we put out a newsletter where we specifically focus on collecting all of the most recent funding sources that they might be able to apply for. And by the way, that includes prizes as well. You'd be amazed at how many clean tech companies that we funded skated along in those early tricky stages on just prize money, whether it's the X Carbon Prize, which is large, but others that are smaller and just keep getting you through month after month. I've also mentioned that we try to be very hands-on, not just in helping companies with the Rocket Fund, but also in just providing advice and support from our office as well. So following on from awardees, I have reporting sessions with previous companies called our quad reports. And the purpose of those are really certainly to report on how they're using the Rocket Fund Award and how they're getting along. But we want to, if they're going sideways, if they're having trouble, we want to know about it so that we can step in and help. So in one early case, for instance, the absolute champion that was necessary to make sure that the pilot project happened decided to retire. He disappeared. So the company that we had awarded the money to was stuck. They didn't have a partner. And our utility, San Diego Gas and Electric, really muscled in. It took a long while, but they were able to secure Walmart as their demonstration partner. And from that, they were able to get their first proto customers, if you like, for the technology that they were developing. So that is one outcome that comes from the reporting structure that we set up, which isn't onerous, by the way. We try to keep it very streamlined and short. Again, growing companies, living hand to mouth a little bit, month to month, don't have time for a lot of reporting. So we try to keep it simple.
Speaking of helping, what have you learned from the companies that you've been working with that have been the most successful? Is there a common list of things they do? Let's go into the not so successful as well. There's a lot to learn from both.
I would say, and this sounds a little bit simplistic, but remembering that I've dealt with over 300 companies, first of all, in the business plan competition, and now we get at least on average 100 companies applying to the Rocket Fund. So I'm speaking from what I'm seeing. And where I see companies failing is because they cannot make the transition from being in love with their technology to thinking about what the market needs and what the customer needs. It sounds simplistic. We all have bought into the lean launchpad kind of concept. It's just hard to do. Because if you're a technologist and scientist who really fall in love with the innovation that you've developed, quite rightly, it's really hard to let it go and give the power, if you like, the decision-making power to someone else. That's probably the single most challenging reason why I've seen companies, if not fail, just stay static. They don't progress. And there's nothing wrong with that. They can remain an applied R&D venture, not a problem with that. That's a good business model, but it's not a growth company. And it typically does not attract investment.
That's the topic we cover on this podcast so much, especially the scientists, the PhDs. I was one. I used to love my technology until the reality hit me that technology only will take you so far. Is that translation? Invention moves to innovation when somebody adopts your technology. It's a huge problem.
That's the single most challenging thing for our innovators to think about. So what made the companies successful? It was interesting. How do you define success? So, for instance, two of our awardees, Antora Energy and now Opus 12, are still really a long way, I would say, from becoming really truly revenue earning independent ventures. They are still maybe at least 5, maybe even 10 years away from that. But they've been successful in attracting partners. They've raised many millions of dollars in follow-on support. Antora Energy, for instance, was able to raise $1 million plus ARPA-E grant, also secured a major California Energy Commission grant, Opus 12, as we know, has received a lot of investment. So that's one definition of success, is that they've been able to raise the money. But my personal definition is that they've been persistent. At any time, these people could have said, I've had enough. I want to go and live a real life instead of keep pushing, pushing, pushing. So in my book, they are successful. But turning to the other model of companies where success is defined more as by an exit, if you like, or maybe sustainably self-financing and revenue generating. Because we're so young, we haven't actually reached that point where we have a company that is big and has the customer base that I could point to and say is $100 million in revenue or whatever. But there are two companies that I wanted to mention that in my books have been successful. One was Ladera, the Stanford spin-out, developing a wildfire retardant that was sprayed on plants. With our money, they were able to test it actually along one of our highways that are here in SoCal, the 118 highway. And they were eventually able to prove that the retardant worked the way that they said it was and attracted the interest of a major player in their field. And they were acquired actually by Perimeter last summer. So that was a very fast exit for them, but was based on proving that they had a product that would probably fill an important gap in Perimeter's product line. The other one is PowerFlex, and that is a Caltech spinout that we supported again with an early stage grant way back in 2016 and 2017. They kept their focus always on the customer. They did not take investment. They just simply were able to secure early revenues from customers that were prepared to test their technology. Again, they built up a portfolio of results, if you like, and they were acquired by EDF Renewables in 2020. And since have actually gone on to grow within the company. When I checked their website last, they are now almost like an independent affiliate within EDF Renewables. They've taken under their wing another subsidiary of EDF Renewables called Enter Solar. And all of a sudden that's catapulted them into probably being a real player, if you like. Just for interest, PowerFlex has developed grid management technology around EV, the adoption of electric vehicles. They have a very powerful platform for managing the grid power distribution. So those to me are two successful examples, but in another direction. They had successful exits reasonably soon after, certainly receiving rockets on money, but even more to being able to demonstrate that their technology worked. And the reason that they were successful is they were prepared to pivot when it was necessary. So they didn't have grandiose dreams about their technology, about what it was going to do. They just took it step by step by step, very much bottoms up. And I feel that that's another pathway to success.
What have they done specifically in terms of the problem you mentioned earlier, transitioning from loving your technology to market adoption? Are there one or two things they did right that others could learn from?
Yes, I can point to them. This includes the other companies I mentioned as well, because I think it's a principle that companies could look for. So there's always been a fair amount of money that's been flowing into clean tech. There's always been a lot of innovation, certainly over the last decade. What do you do when you're starting out with your technology? Well, the idea is to find a niche in the market nobody else is addressing. So, for instance, let's take Ladera, the wildfire retardant. Certainly people were concerned about it, but nobody was really taking it that seriously. Even 2 years ago, people would say they were reactive to wildfires. We'll just go out and spray them. Nobody was thinking about prevention. Ladera came up with a solution that worked. I shouldn't say nobody, there were select companies out there, but they came up with a solution that worked, that absolutely the timing was perfect. All of a sudden, wildfires became real at the time that they were testing their retardant. And they tapped into a market that was growing. In the case of PowerFlex, there was a lot of interest. If you remember, this is the EV charging solution for managing grid power. They tapped into a customer base that was really being overlooked. And that was school environment, actually. It was the high school environment that were facing the challenge. They were being asked to go green. More of their teachers, more of their staff were adopting electric vehicles. It's expensive to actually build a lot of electric vehicle chargers. So PowerFlex could come in and say, look, we'll work with you and we'll show you how you can build maybe 20% fewer electric vehicle chargers than you think you need to satisfy what you see as the demand, but we'll redistribute the power in a way that will make that workable for you. So they started in the Bay Area, actually. Their early customers were high schools and high school districts. And from that, they were able to prove the technology worked. And EDF Renewables then saw, yes, this is technology that's very powerful. We want it. One last case, and that is Axiom Exergy. They were a company that decided to look at the food retail business. Companies like Safeway and other retail chains operate on razor-thin margins. So Axiom said, if we can help them manage their refrigeration costs for their huge cases of refrigerated food in a way that actually contributes to that razor-thin bottom line, they might be interested in employing our technology. So they identified, again, a market that was being overlooked. They provided a solution for them. And as I say, they morphed their business model into actually managing the power requirements of these food retailers. So that's a suggestion about how people can be successful.
This is so encouraging to hear about how these technologies are being adopted. There are two things that stand out in this particular case. They got the right money at the right time. How is this landscape evolving from the seed stage? We talked about this earlier, about how hard climate change is and clean tech energy adoption is. How is that funding landscape evolving in your observation?
Needless to say, I think it's obvious to everybody that all of a sudden clean tech has become the investor arena of choice. So we're seeing a lot more investment actually flowing into not just later stage companies, but even earlier stage companies. Breakthrough Energy Ventures certainly led the way, but there's others like Prime Movers Lab is another, Derivative is another. Also, Lower Carbon is yet another one that I like particularly because they focused on carbon reduction before anybody else would. So there's a lot of not so small investor groups that are forming and supporting clean tech. But that always comes at a price. And the price is that you give away equity. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. With giving away equity, you lose control over how your technology is going to be developed. And for people like scientists and technologists who really care about that, they have spent their time and their treasure often on innovation, their innovation, because they want it to have an impact. Sometimes they are at odds with the funding agencies who may not see it the same way. So I still want to encourage people to look at grant funding sources. So the Department of Energy under this new administration is launching every day new funding for different programs coming out. And from being a little bit removed, let's say, from the demonstration phase of clean tech companies, even as late as last summer, there was a very influential report that came out that said that precious little of the DOE funding was going into demonstration. And that's dramatically changed. For instance, it was actually Secretary Granholm that announced just a few days ago that there was going to be a major carbon reduction Earthshot initiative. She didn't put a dollar number onto it, but I am sure that that's going to represent millions of dollars that is going into identifying and supporting earlier stage technologies, finding ways to actually make sure that they have an impact in reducing carbon dioxide, capturing it and then transforming it. So that sort of thing is very encouraging. But there's another source of funding actually that's in some ways interesting to startups that are already running and are finding it challenging to find the kind of, how should I say, bankable support that allows you to plow it into overhead, plows it into maybe buying new facilities or accessing new facilities, moving to new facilities. And that's called the LPO, the Loan Programs Office. They apparently are sitting on as much as $40 billion worth of loan funding that they have not been able to disperse. I've actually talked to companies about trying to access administratively. It has been very challenging in the past. But in the case of clean tech, this is changing. Actually, they've appointed a new head. His name is Jigat Shah. And Jigat Shah, you may recall, was the founder of Sun Edison that eventually went bankrupt, but he was actually long removed from it at the point that it went bankrupt. But he's been critical of the LPO program and other things, actually. He's very outspoken. So the DOE, in its wisdom, have taken him on this summer to manage that program. Again, that would be something I would address people to look out for.
Thank you for those resources. We'll have this in the show notes so people can look them up. The other point you touched about was timing. When you invest into startups, how do you consider the aspect of timing? How does it play a role in your funding companies?
We favor companies that are probably 1 or 2 years removed from the lab or the garage. They've moved beyond the applied R&D phase. So we don't actually support applied R&D, but they're still developing their technology. So we know that they are still very fragile. They need to prove their technology. They typically will have a good team together that we know can implement the Rocket Fund. Not completely built out. I may have mentioned that earlier. We know that as they grow, they're going to have to bring on other people. We like to see that there's a strategy for that. They don't have to have those in place. They probably don't have the funding for it when they apply to the Rocket Fund. We do like to see that they know they're going to need these people in maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years or 5 when the customers are actually secured, and they're going to have to be looking at things like supply chain, further investment for scale up, building up facilities, that type of thing. So that's the team. We've talked already about the technology stage should be TRL 5 to 7. We provide a definition of that based on the Department of Energy's definition, so you can check that out as part of the guidelines. And also, the most important thing, and I'm glad that we are in a way rounding up our conversation by stressing this, in order to receive a Rocket Fund award, you have to be incorporated. You don't have to be incorporated before you apply or during, but in order to get the money, you have to have a business account. Most importantly, you have to have either a customer or a strategic partner or a laboratory testing site that is recognized as the gold standard by your customers as your partner in demonstrating your prototype. So we have to see that. You have to have that lined up by the time that you get an award. You can be in discussion during the application process and the review, but you have to have that secured. And that's why the Rocket Fund has been successful and why it's different. Because a lot of companies will apply for grants, nothing wrong with that, I've already said that, but they use the money to do more applied R&D. We actually force you to escape that kind of cycle, go into the real world, test your technology against a real world point. And that's why that customer point is so important to have.
One question that I wanted to ask you was, how do you think about returns when you invest in these startups? They're so far away from any revenues, most of them. What are the time horizons you have in mind in terms of the vision for the fund?
Well, just to say that we don't actually ask for any return on investment. This is a free gift, basically, once you get one. So we don't even come back to you and say, will you please give us some money out of your latest $10 million round? We may in the future, but not now. But we do ask that you do your bit in spreading the word about the Rocket Fund to other entrepreneurs, helping us promote the word, supporting us where you can, because we don't have a huge marketing budget. We're not a huge government-funded program. Nothing wrong with them, but I'm just saying that we don't have those resources. So word of mouth is really important for us, especially since we like to think of ourselves as a small elite kind of fund that depends on that. And the other thing is telling your good news stories. We publish a newsletter. We love to capture them. Anytime that you can spend a moment sending me an email about how you progressed and do a testimonial, if you like, for us about how the Rocket Fund helped, it'll help us in our fundraising too. And I'll just say a couple of words about that. The Rocket Fund runs on membership. And if you go to our website, you'll see they include utilities, they include EPRI, they include Wells Fargo. We had to put on hold with COVID our plans for increasing the membership base, growing the membership base. But we are relaunching that campaign. Our goal is to be able to raise enough money to be able to give out $1 million a year in the kind of funding that we do. So it's a fairly ambitious goal, but we think it's achievable over 5 years. So again, helping us to connect with anybody. You meet somebody, you talk to them. It might be a company, it might be a legal firm, it might be anybody who says, oh, that sounds interesting. The Rocket Fund, I'd like to know more about that. Any way that you can connect us would be very much appreciated.
It is actually one of the goals of this podcast to get the word out about phenomenal resources like Rocket Fund, especially when guests like you offer advice on the application process. On that note, are there specific areas that you're focused on funding for the next granting period?
Within those 5 categories, maybe the things that seem to be most exciting to us and addressing again the white spaces that we feel need to be filled include, for instance, industrial materials, okay? Those that are being engineered at maybe a nano or molecular level even, that are lighter, that are stronger, and are easier to manufacture with less greenhouse gas production than previously. That's really important. Generally, decarbonizing industries is really a focus for us this year. In agriculture, precision agriculture with novel methods of delivering water, renewable power, and plant stimulants, all of this is embedded in the notion of precision agriculture. And then if you wed it to things like sophisticated remote sensing and data collection and analysis, believe it or not, the agriculture industry is changing. And we'd like to see more applications in that area as well. I would say, and this is a blanket suggestion, but anything in carbon capture, with a focus on what is realistic, what can be scaled up. We're seeing a lot of daily announcements about funding going into this, about new projects in that, about money being thrown at carbon capture. But I feel that our team really knows how to separate those that have a realistic chance of succeeding and having an impact from the rest. So I don't mean to be so narrow and prescriptive, but think about that when you're applying for a Rocket Fund award, because that's what we'll be looking at as well. One other thing that I don't want to be remiss in mentioning, we are putting a renewed emphasis on, like many people, on diversity and female leadership in clean tech. In fact, 20% of our scoring is going to be assigned to looking at that. So you'll see on the application form that there's a request to be specific about how you are encouraging that or how your corporate structure actually includes that. And I certainly want more applicants to be coming from those communities.
On that note, any closing thoughts, any deadlines coming up, and how best to reach you?
The opening of the Rocket Fund is going to happen in a couple of weeks. So the best way to find out what it's all about is to go to the Caltech website, Google Rocket Fund, Resnick Sustainability Institute. You'll find all the information you need there. And I would encourage anybody who's interested to start an application. You can update it at any time until the deadline, which is this year, is going to be midnight, March the 4th. And that way you get a feel for what we're asking for. Then you can turn around and you can contact me and say, look, started this application, but I've got questions about whether our technology fits, whether we're at the right stage. What do you want in the way of a customer focus? Do I have to have $1 billion market? All of those questions that I get asked a lot. Happy to answer those questions, help you shape your application. And you can reach me by email, stephanie.janchinski@caltech.edu. I think it'll be included in the notes, but I'm very easy to get to. Don't hesitate. And apart from that, I would say that if you have any questions about submitting an application, we'd rather see you than not. So even if you don't get guidance from me, but you're still unsure about whether you should apply, throw it in. It probably takes no more than maybe a couple of hours to fill out the application. It's quite simple. That way, you will definitely be seen. You'll get an answer from us. And that's important because you want to get the word out about what you're doing as wide as possible. And we have a pretty good network. So I would encourage everybody to apply.
Thank you, Stephanie. This has been fun. I learned a lot about the Rocket Fund and all the fascinating startups that you've been funding. I don't think they'll be here without the support of funding agencies like yourself. Thank you for doing this, and I wish you a lot of success.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lab to Startup podcast. You can find links to the resources and programs mentioned in these episodes, connect with Naresh, or subscribe to this show at labtostartup.com.